All right, well, obviously Israel and Hamas and the attacks and everything is in the media and is point of topic at the moment. And I thought what I'd do is share a little bit of background. To be honest, it's been a bit difficult to get everything I wanted to share into one message. I probably could have preached 3 or 4 to get you some background. But what I've tried to do is skim across the surface and just give you some background into what's going on in Israel. Now, we're not going to get into any real prophecy or future time events because as we go through Daniel, a lot of this stuff will be addressed, especially when we get to chapter 9 and chapter 12. So I've kind of left that to one side and kind of looking at more of the history of Israel, Hamas, and where all this animosities come from. Now, Israel may be 300 miles long, 30 miles wide, but it's 3,000 years deep. Israel is God, or Israelis are God's chosen people. The last few weeks have been hard and have caused the world to hold their collective breath. While the concept of war in and around Israel and Palestine isn't anything new, the sheer savagery of the attacks that have caused many to be utterly bewildered. The targeting of civilian life has shocked the world. The loss of life, the bloodshed, and the destruction of property has been heartbreaking. Watching footage of people who have been burnt alive, women that have been raped, families that have been murdered, and innocent civilians being taken hostage has just been so hard to comprehend. And it's been interesting watching people comment on it, and people are just lost for words. In this time of chaos and terrorism, I am reminded of God's words to Abraham when he chose him to be the father of this great nation. And he said, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you." Folks, those who stand with Israel will be blessed by God. Those who stand against Israel will fall under the judgment of God. As Christians, we recognize God's purpose and God's plan for Israel. And as God's people, we must stand with her, even in the face of criticism, hatred, and bigotry. And I'm here this morning to tell you that your pastor stands with Israel. Now, Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th of this year with approximately 5,000 missile attacks and a ground invasion resulting in over 1,000 Israelis killed or kidnapped. The interesting thing is Israel was actually in peace talks with the Palestinians, with the Hamas, with the leaders of those that dwelt in the Gaza Strip. And while they were in peace talks and believing that they were making progress, Hamas launched the missile attacks, which drew the attention of the Israeli Defense Force away to where the attacks were going on, which then allowed the thousands of terrorists to burst through the borders and go on into Israel to kill and to kidnap. And the thing that we need to keep in mind is they did this on the weekend of one of their holidays, one of their long weekends, religious holiday. So the border was probably at its least manned. So it was relatively easy for them to just blow the fences and go on in and do what they needed to do. Now, in response, and I guess to the chagrin of the rest of the world, Israel has mobilized 360,000 reservists intent on eliminating Hamas. Now, to give you guys some perspective of what we've seen, in 2019, 51 people were killed in the Christchurch mosque attack. The nation was horrified. You guys can remember back to those days and the news reports and the feeling that was going through, the emotions that were going through the nation at that time. 51 innocent people were gunned down. Now, if that attack in Israel was carried out in New Zealand and it was proportional, that would have resulted in the death of 500 people. 10 times the death toll in Christchurch. So you imagine, you think back to that shock and the horror and all the emotion that was going on when that happened in Christchurch, and imagine that being 10 times the death rate. 10 times 500 people, innocent people, viciously murdered. So what are we to make of all of this? How do we make sense of it? Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? One way to make sense of it, and I'll just touch on it, is that God's said this is going to happen. While I don't think this is necessarily the peace that this isn't the end times and Jesus is going to come tomorrow, I do believe this is another piece in the puzzle, bringing us that much closer. And it's interesting that the world is starting to take notice and realize time is running out. The history of Israel, though, started some 4,000 years ago when God told Abram, later called Abraham, to go from his home in Ur of the Chaldees, which is probably located somewhere around southern Iraq, and travel to the land that God would give to him and his descendants, which was the land that we know as Israel. It was from there that God would make a people for himself, a people to be a witness of him to the world. As part of that deal, they were given the land of Canaan for perpetuity. And I want you to get that. When God gave Abraham the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, and said, this is the land for you and your descendants, it was given to them in perpetuity. It was always going to be theirs. God said to Abraham, I will confirm my covenant, my agreement, my contract with you and your descendants after you, from generation to generation. There's the perpetuity. This is an everlasting covenant. I will always be your God and the God of your descendants after you. I will give you the entire land of Canaan, where you now live as a foreigner, to you and your descendants. It will be their possession forever, and I will be their God. Note that in Genesis 17, God says, I will be their God. Here God is claiming Israel to be his own. In fact, in Isaiah 43, he told Israel, you are mine. So here we have God identifying himself with a particular people. 2 Samuel 7 tells us, you made Israel your very own people forever, and you, O Lord, became their God. Verse 24. Here we have the God of Israel declaring Israel as his very own people forever. It follows, of course, that those who contend with Israel are actually contending with God. And God will fight on Israel's behalf because they are his chosen people. And right now, Hamas and the Palestinians and the Arab nations that hate Israel believe that they are winning. You know, everybody's saying, why the delay? Why is Israel sitting back and not rolling in there? They're going to do it right. You know, they got to retrain some of the people that are volunteering. You know, it's people like me and Dave and Gareth. You know, Gareth stops being an accountant and goes down and picks up a gun. You got to be reminded how to shoot the thing. You know, which end the bullets come out of. But they're getting prepared to do it. They're also making sure that as many people as can are out of harm's way so that they go after Hamas. And the interesting thing is with face recognition, They've been working to identify all the people on all the video footage that they've got of the terrorists coming in and attacking the kibbutzes and places like that, and so they can track them down and make them pay for what they did. God made a people for himself for a specific purpose. God made Israel to be his witness to the nations, to be his servants. He also chose Israel to be the nation through which he would bless all nations through Jesus Christ. To gain some appreciation, here's a map of Israel and New Zealand. This will help you understand the size of Israel compared to New Zealand. So Israel's a little blue bit. New Zealand is 12 times bigger than Israel. That gives you some perspective. But Israel was bigger than that. Look at this. Through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob came the 12 tribes of Israel, and they inhabited the land that God gave them. The map on the left is a picture of how the 12 tribes settled. And this side is Israel today. So you can see places like Jordan and Syria and up into Lebanon is land that was all owned, well, was settled by Israel. So Israel's a whole lot smaller. And the interesting thing is the West Bank was part of Israel. And Israel made peace. They gave up parts of the West Bank in order to make peace. The Gaza Strip, which is down in the bottom left-hand corner of Israel, is where they burst through. Note that the maps, this includes the area known as Israel, embraces the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights. Furthermore, it's important to realize that God's covenant was unconditional, meaning even today the nation of Israel owns the land we call Israel, as well as land claimed by bordering countries. Because one of the things you've got to bear in mind, and I'll touch on this in a bit, is since Israel was declared as an independent nation in 1948, they've been under constant attack from the bordering nations. And during those scuffles, Israel has taken land, and some of the other foreign countries have taken land off Israel. But the thing we need to understand is present-day Israel is not occupying Palestinian land. The land of Israel is the land of Israel. It is the land that God gave them. And Jews have dwelt in Israel since the time of Abraham. Now, it always hasn't been, I think at the moment their population is roughly around 10 million. It hasn't been as many as that, but there's always been a remnant of Jewish people living in Israel. Now, the biblical history of Israel is dramatic. After the glorious Davidic kingdom around 1000 BC, the tribes of Israel gradually fell away from their God, and through their disobedience were uprooted from their land and scattered throughout the nations. In the first century, Rome destroyed the Holy Temple in about 70 AD, and they conquered the Jewish nation. At this time, the Romans renamed the region Palestine. That's where the idea of Palestine comes from, and the Palestinians. The Romans didn't want to call it Israel, so they changed its name to Palestine, and they exiled huge portions of the population and distributed them throughout the Roman Empire. However, a remnant of Jews remained behind. For the 2 millennia after the Roman conquest, no other state or unique group developed in the region. Instead, different empires and people came, colonized, ruled, and disappeared. But a Jewish presence remained in Palestine during these changes and during these successive countries that took over and ruled Palestine. Throughout these 2,000 years, Jews, regardless of their current country of residency, continued to view a return to their ancient homeland as an essential part of their identity and a source of hope. Between 1517 and 1917, so for 400 years, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire. The region initially prospered under the Ottomans, but during the empire's decline, it was reduced into a sparsely populated, impoverished, barren area. A lot of the Arabs even moved out of Israel, or at that time Palestine, because it was so impoverished. And a lot of Jewish people from other countries in the world would import food and supplies to keep the Jews that were living in Palestine, to enable them to live and survive. Meanwhile, the Zionist movement was emerging in Europe in the late 19th century, generated by increasing anti-Semitism and violence against Jews in Europe, as well as the rising nationalism throughout the continent. The Zionists, whose goal was the return of the Jewish people to a sovereign state in the land of Israel, fostered increased Jewish immigration to Palestine and sought international political recognition of the Jewish right to independence in Palestine. When the Ottoman Empire was defeated in World War I, its lands were ceded to the victorious Allies, who carved the land into new nations, which included Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. So the countries that we know as Iraq and Lebanon and Syria were created after World War I by the British Empire. And they didn't do it with any real thought as to the political ramifications. They just carved it up. Under the treaty, the League of Nations formally gave control of Palestine to the British government. Britain's job was to implement the Balfour Declaration, which had been signed 5 years earlier, stating Britain's desire to create a homeland in Palestine for the Jews. Even before this declaration, Jews had begun to purchase land and settle in the country. As they continued to do so, the Jewish population grew to some 600,000 on the eve of World War II. Of course, with the modern return of Jews to the land of Israel, when that began, the Arabs living there, there were Arabs living there. And towards the end of the 19th century, and more so into the early 20th century, the national consciousness of these Arabs emerged as Palestinian nationalism and began to rise, and the Arabs in the land of Palestine wanted their own independence. Thus, the Arab desire for independence clashed with the Jewish desire for return. British control over this area lasted from 1923, so basically from the end of World War I, to 1948, to the conclusion of World War II, during which times the authorities were challenged by demands of the Zionists for Jewish self-government and a growing Arab national movement rejecting the Jewish presence and national aspirations. So right from day one, when the Jews were trying to move back into their homeland, their traditional homeland, set it up as a Jewish nation, begin to govern themselves and be an independent nation, the Arabs that largely hadn't been living in this place for quite a few years, they started to decide, well, we want to make this an Arab nation, and we want Palestine to be all Arab and run by Arabs and be Islamic and fall under Sharia law and all of that sort of stuff. So right from day one, there was a clash of nationalities. Growing Jewish-Arab violence and attacks on British personnel by some Jewish extremists led Britain to announce that it sought to end its mandate in the area. Following Britain's February 1947 announcement okay, 1947, of its intention to terminate its mandated government, the UN General Assembly appointed a special committee, which they called the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, to make recommendations on Israel's future government. This committee recommended the establishment of two separate states, a Jewish state and an Arab state, to be joined by economic union with the Jerusalem-Bethlehem region as an enclave under the international administration. So in other words, they said, why don't the Arabs and the Jews share the land? They can be joined by economics, and we'll put an independent enclave based in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, in that area, just to kind of keep an eye on things. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly voted on the partition plan, adopted it by 33 votes. The Jewish side accepted, and this is important to understand, they voted on this partition plan in 1947. The Jewish side accepted the UN plan for establishment of the two states. The Arab states rejected the plan and almost immediately formed volunteer armies that infiltrated into Palestine against the Jews. And the reason I stress this sort of thing is because when you study out the history, time and time again, you see Israel compromises to make peace, to get on and just live as an independent nation, but the Arab states reject and always turn to violence. The UN plan for a two-state country was probably not what the Jews wanted. They wanted it themselves. They wanted all of Israel to be for Jews and for them to be an independent, recognized state. However, they were prepared to compromise on that, go to the two-state plan in order to have peace. The Jews compromised, the Arabs didn't. And what did they do? They got militia together and started fighting against the Jews. However, in 1948, Israel became a recognized, established, independent, sovereign state. And that happened in Tel Aviv on Friday, May 14th, 1948. Zionist leader David Ben-Gurion was there to see that happen. Now here's the thing I find rather interesting. Israel became a sovereign nation in 1948. A year earlier, Pakistan was partitioned from British India and achieved independence from British rule on August 15th, 1947. Nobody questions Pakistan's right to be an independent nation. Now, yeah, there's tension between Indians and Pakistanis, and I get that, but nobody questions Pakistan's right to exist as a nation. Yet a year later, Israel gets declared as an independent nation, a somewhat cut down version of the biblical Israel. And since day one, everybody's questioned their right to exist as a nation. Throughout history, nations have tried to exterminate the Jews and the nation of Israel. Oh, so I've dropped the picture. Interesting. Egypt. Pharaoh declared, kill the firstborn of Israel, throw all baby boys into the river. Haman of Persia. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Esther 3:6. Closer to our time period, Antiochus Epiphanes. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws, Daniel 7:25. Herod the Great. Herod gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and in its vicinity, Matthew 2:16. The Romans in AD 70, they killed and drove out the Jews, making Jerusalem a non-Jewish city. Hitler and Stalin killed 6 million Jews during World War II. In fact, Hitler killed 6 million Jews and Stalin killed many millions more as well. Then there's the Arab states that have been at war with Israel since its inception. And there are 7 notable wars that we remember. There's the war of 1948 and 49, the war in 1956, the war in 1967, the war in 1973, the war in 1982, the war in 2006, and then the terror attack of 2023. In 1948, there was the War of Independence, when the UN voted to the partition the Palestinian Arabs, with the help of the Arab states, Syria, Iraq, Iran, those sort of ones, launched attacks against Israel to seize the entire mandate. In other words, to seize the whole of the land. On May 14th, 1948, Israel declared independence and was immediately invaded by armies of 5 Arab nations: Egypt, Syria, Transjordan, Lebanon, and Iraq. The newly formed Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, managed to prevail after 15 months of war. That to me is just mind-blowing. You know, you've been striving for quite a few years to be declared an independent nation. It finally happens, and and it should be a time of celebration, and you're immediately attacked. And then you go to war for 15 months. There was the 6-Day War in 1967, 2 years before I was born. Israel was forced to defend itself when Syria, Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq intensified their attacks, and Egypt illegally blocked Israel's access to international waters and expelled UN peacekeeping forces. 4 Arab countries mobilized more than 250,000 troops in preparation for a full-scale invasion. Israel preempted the invasion in a defensive war, managed to capture the West Bank from Jordan, Gaza, the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. Now, we don't have a lot of time to go in it, but it's fascinating if you look at that war and you look at the land that they captured, and most of it they've given back. The Sinai Peninsula, which is a huge chunk of land when you look at it on a map, is part of a peace deal with Egypt. Israel gave back the land. And here's the thing. Before they gave it back, they discovered oil in that region. Israel could have kept the land, dug for the oil, and made themselves a very, very wealthy nation. But peace was more important than oil, and they gave the land back. And as you go through the history, and I'll say this time and time again, they continually compromise in the name of peace. In 1973, there was the Yom Kippur War involving the Arab nations. And again, you'll hear these nations over and over again. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Libya, Morocco, Sudan, and other Arab states. Into this traditional mix has been added Iran. So again, all the nations that surround, Arab nations that surround Israel have continually been at war with them. And then this month, Hamas. So who are the Palestinians? And what exactly is the plight of oppression that they claim? The Palestinian people are actually really a diverse group comprising the modern descendants of a broad range of peoples who have lived in the region over the centuries and who today are largely culturally and linguistically Arab. Now, because of various wars and exodus, many now exist as Palestinian refugees and blame their plight entirely upon Israel. One thing to remember is that when the Ottoman Empire was declining, the land of Israel, the land of what was known as Palestine, became a barren wasteland that nobody wanted to live in. And that was nothing to do with the Jews, because they were a really small minority. It was the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, that was governing that region. So any idea of blame ought to go to that kingdom, not Israel. In fact, the Palestinian population who live abroad, more than half are stateless, lacking citizenship in any country. Even so, roughly 1/2 of the world's Palestinian population continues to reside in the area encompassing the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and Israel. However, because such a broad heritage and mixing of peoples evident in Palestine, the history of a distinct Palestinian national identity remains a highly disputed issue among many scholars today, as does their wish to become a standalone nation and claim to certain lands. Point in case, today there are only two groups of people that are not recognized as part of the United Nations organization. One is the Vatican City, or the Holy See, and the other is Palestine. See, here's what most people don't understand. The Palestinian state, the Palestinian states, right from the very start, or the Palestinian people, the Palestinian government, has stated right from the very start that they would unify all the displaced Arab people in the Middle East in a common cause against Israel. This is what's given rise to war and the conflict in the present age. The Arab states that want to take back Israel and make it an Arab state has declared war against Israel and the Jewish people. Furthermore, Israel has sought peace with Palestine on numerous occasions and has even made a number of concessions to offer land and wealth so the Palestinian people could have their own country. When Israel gave back the Gaza Strip, there were Jewish people living in the Gaza Strip. They had their own military presence in the Gaza Strip to protect their people. And in order to make peace with the Palestinian people, they said, "Give us the Gaza Strip." And Israel said, "Okay." And they moved the people out, the Jewish people, out of the Gaza Strip and resettled them in other places around Israel. They moved their military presence out of the Gaza Strip and gave it back to the Palestinian people. They put a border up and they said, "You govern yourself, you look after yourself, and we're all going to be good." Interesting thing is that even though the Palestinian government, there was Palestinians ruling Palestine or the Gaza Strip, Israel was still supplying them with water, with power, medical supplies, food supplies. They were living off the generosity of Israel. But yet, those that live in the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians say that, Israel is this oppressor. And it just doesn't stack up. But this has always ended in violence, because what the Palestinians ultimately want is the annihilation of Israel and the full occupation of its land, including Jerusalem. So what is Hamas? Well, Hamas is an acronym for Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyah, and they are the Islamic resistance movement. And they were founded in 1987 during the first Palestinian uprising against Israel occupying Gaza and the West Bank. And they're connected with the Muslim Brotherhood. And most of the terrorist attacks around the world, the Muslim Brotherhood have their finger in it. Hamas was designated a terrorist group by the Israelis and by Israel, the US, the EU, and the UK. It receives backing from Iran, which provides its funds, weapons, and training. In 2006, Hamas won parliamentary elections. So they went and stood as a political party in 2006. And in 2007, the group violently seized control of the Gaza Strip from the Palestinian Authority. There have been no elections since. Hamas is fundamentalist, a radical movement, and its original charter from 1988 called for the destruction of Israel and the establishment of a Palestinian state. The charter also includes incitements of violence against Jews, the imposition of Sharia law, and the rejection of any peace. And it clearly says it. No land, no peace. There's a third one, no rest, I think. But basically, and whenever you watch the news and you see them chant, the Palestinians that are protesting, you see them doing that chant from the river to the sea, that's a basically code word for, we're going to destroy and kill all Jewish people and drive them out of the land of Israel. Now, that's the historical background, okay? And folks, there's a lot more that can be shared, but it's just really hard. The other thing we need to be aware of is that we live in a time where there's media bias. And the media bias is a persistent issue that often surfaces when discussing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Whether on the ground or from a distance, reporting on this complex and sensitive topic can be challenging. But the reality is that whenever it's presented, the Israelites, the Jewish nation, are the bad guys, and the Palestinians are the put upon, the oppressed, and the victims of all of this. Terror groups understand this, and they take full advantage of it and use it to sway public opinion to side with the Palestinians. As a result, coverage is often selective, stories get framed in a misleading way, or certain perspectives go missing. For example, nobody's focusing on why the Israelites are mobilizing 360,000 reservists to go into the Gaza Strip. They're just looking at this army amassing on the border and saying how terrible it is. The reality is that Israel was attacked by Hamas. They attacked civilians, they attacked families, and this is a response to it. If you're attacked, you have a right to defend yourself. Instead of focusing on Hamas massacre of Israeli citizens, Israelis' efforts to thwart terrorists, destroy terrorist headquarters or weapon sites, and prevent more civilian deaths, some major media outlets characterize Israel's targeted response to terror attacks as attacks on innocent and beleaguered Palestinians, feeding an unequivocal false narrative. So Israel cut off the water and electricity into the Gaza Strip. The world condemned it. What they didn't report, that's only half the story. What they didn't report was that Israel said, we're cutting off the water, we're going to cut off the electricity, but we'll put it back on if you release the hostages. So it was a bargaining chip. So if the Palestinians want the power and water back on, release the hostages, and Israel will turn it back on. When the hospital was targeted and bombed, everybody said it was Israel, but it could be a misfire, but we don't really know. Well, folks, it was a misfire. It was a Palestinian rocket. Where the hospital stands, there's a graveyard right behind it. And in that graveyard, they've set up missile batteries. And there's footage from Al Jazeera TV, which is pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, shows footage of this missile being launched, malfunctioning and crashing into the parking lot in the hospital. The interesting thing is when it was first reported, the hospital had been bombed with hundreds of people dead and sick, all this sort of stuff. But when a couple of days later, you get footage starting to come in. The hospital's still standing. The rocket exploded in the car park, and there was a little bit of damage to the building, but it didn't flatten the hospital. But nobody's feeding that second story. Even now, after it's been proven that it wasn't Israel, media still report it as this bomb that could have been Israel, or could have been Palestine. You know, it's been proven that it was from Palestinian sources. Israel is regularly, in the media, is regularly accused of genocide. According to the UN, her alleged victims, the Arabs of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and eastern Jerusalem, were about 1.1 million in 1970. Now they number around 5.2 million. So the question is, where's the genocide? Even if the figures are wrong or exaggerated, there's still more Arabs living in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and eastern Jerusalem now than there were in 1970. So if Israel is carrying out genocide, they're not doing a very good job. You know? So again, the accusation is simply crazy. Israel is regularly accused of apartheid, although Israeli Arabs and Jewish citizens have equal rights, both de jure and de facto. In fact, in Israel they have Arab people of Arab descent in the government. You know? There are no segregated facilities in Israel, no separate beaches, restrooms, or lunch counters. Although on the Temple Mount, which is controlled by the Palestinians, Jews are forbidden to drink water from any of the water faucets on the Temple Mount. So who's doing the apartheid? Jerusalem or the Palestinians? The Arabs in the disputed territories, by internationally recognized agreements, are citizens of the Palestinian Authority, and insofar as the PA holds elections and can vote in them. So they get the opportunity in Gaza to rule themselves. They're not ruled by the Israelis. They have nothing to do with the Israeli government. They get to rule themselves. And in fact, a lot of the Arabs do better in Israel than they actually do in the Palestinian countries. Folks, whenever you read the reports online or listen to the news, you need to understand that these people are biased. They're just pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel. And if you keep that in mind, you can start to search for the other half of the story, because there's always stuff missing. Sorry, there's a lot of information. I'm trying to scan through it because it's getting on. So what are we to do? You know, what are we as Christians to do? We understand the politics. We understand the media is biased. We understand the academia is biased. What are we to do? Knowing the truth of all of this, what should we do? Well, thankfully, the psalmist David gives us the answer. I think I put it up there. He said, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Peace be within thy walls, and prosperity within thy palaces. For my brethren and companions' sake, I will now say, peace be with thee. Guys, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for the peace of that nation. But don't get caught up in the peace rhetoric of world politicians or media. Because the truth is, there is only one way one thing that will restore lasting peace within Israel and Jerusalem, and that's the return of the Lord. And in all of this, if you're going to choose sides, make sure you're on God's side. God said, I will bless those that bless thee and curse him that curses thee. There's a right side and a wrong side, and I want to be on the right side. I'm going to be on God's side, and I'm going to stand with Israel. Thank you this morning. All right.